getting your belly slit open by a wandering witch or getting eaten by a huge Ucat might not be the kind of festive Yuletide stories that we're used to, but the folklore of winter is actually some of the darkest, creepiest and strangest of any time of the year. Winter has always been a time of darkness, mystery and superstition. With shortened days and long nights, cultures all over the world have developed a really rich narrative of stories and winter creatures. Tales of terrifying beasts, mischievous spirits and punishing figures were told to keep children in line, explain the harsh realities of the season, or encourage people to simply just get their work done before the end of the year. Now, I think we're all used to stories of Jolly Saint Nick and Santa Claus and his lovely reindeers coming down the chimney and giving gifts to children. And although he is said to leave coal for naughty children, that's about as bad as it gets. But some of the creatures that I'm going to be telling you about in this video are worlds apart from someone like Santa Claus. There are winter creatures and folk tales from all around the world, but in this video I'm going to be focusing primarily on Europe and Britain. Just like with any folklore or folk traditions, it really depends on what part of the world you're from as to which stories you'll get. So a lot of these stories were passed down through oral tradition, they weren't written down originally, and that means that village to village can differ on the exact nuances of the story and of the creature. So this is a general sweep of who these characters are and doesn't go into the depth of every single region. I also can't mention every single creature because I'll be here all day long, but I've picked out a few that I think you'll find interesting. It's very windy in my house today and you can hear it coming down the chimney, so I'm testing out this little microphone. I don't know if it's going to work, but we'll see. So hopefully the audio is going to be okay for you. So let's get into it with one of the most well-known ones. So there's no way I could do this video without talking about Krampus, one of the most famous of the winter monsters. Like all things in folklore, his origins are a little bit murky, but it appears that Krampus can be traced back to pre-Christian alpine traditions. It's thought that perhaps he was a pre-Christian pagan creature who got sort of morphed with the Christian devil over the years to become what he is today. He is now the antithesis of jolly old Saint Nick, and he is the one that will punish the children when they've misbehaved. His name derives from the Old High German Krampen, which means claw, which is very fitting and gives you an idea about his appearance and mannerisms. And he's said to be like a half goat, half demon beast with cloven hooves, sharp claws and a very, very long tongue. And in some stories he will have twigs or a whip or branches to whip naughty children with. In some stories, Krampus is said to stuff naughty children into his sack and take them back to his lair. And Krampus is not this lost thing of legend. There is a big resurgence in Krampus, and you might have seen all of these videos on social media recently of Krampus runs, and or maybe that's just my algorithm, but it's definitely made a comeback and people want to preserve these old traditions. So we have Krampusnacht on December the 5th, with St. Nicholas's Day being on the 6th, where people will dress up in costumes of Krampus and parade through the streets in Austria, Germany and areas like that. And there's even one in the UK that I know about in Whitby. There might be ones in other places as well, but Krampus is definitely making a comeback. Through the years, the government has tried to suppress this, but the tradition still endures, and now it is something that is very special to these regions and is celebrated every year. A lot of crazy winter folklore comes from the alpine region of Europe, and I had to mention Frau Perchta, the belly slitter, sometimes referred to as the Christmas witch. So again, this uncertainty about the origins of Perchta and whether she is a pre-Christian pagan goddess. Many people believe that she's derived from a pagan goddess who oversaw spinning and weaving, and that reason will become clear why in just a few moments. But some people believe that she had to have come post-Christianity because her name, perchta, may come from an old meaning the bright one, and people associate this with the Christian celebration of Epiphany. Wherever she comes from, she's now become a firm legend, and there are said to be 2 versions of her. One of them is beautiful and pale and light as the potential meaning of her name, and the other is a dark, gruesome, haggard version. In some stories she's said to have a very large foot, like a goose foot or a swan foot, and she may have been able to shapeshift into other animals. So in Bavarian and Austrian folklore, she is not a very pleasant character at all. And what she does is come down through the countryside through the winter months during the 12 days of Christmas, and she was searching for people, primarily children, servants and women, who had not finished their spinning and weaving before the end of the year. So if they had finished all the spinning and they didn't have any flax left or whatever it is they were using, she might leave a silver coin in their shoe. However, if not, you might meet a very grisly end where she will slit open your belly and stuff it with straw. So a lot of these tales sort of come back to the idea of being good or being bad, being lazy or not, and the idea of you haven't done all the stuff that you were supposed to this year, you've been lazy and idle, and you've left your spinning till the last minute, and now you're going to get punished for it. So it's really an incentive to get everything done and work hard before the year end. We've got stories of people starting to leave out offerings for perchta, so food and drink and other things. Again, this was sort of suppressed by authorities. They didn't want this to happen, but it still continued. Much like the Krampus runs, today we still have Perchtenlaufen, which is where 2 groups of people, one group dressed as their sort of bright and beautiful pale version of perchta, and the dark grisly one will fight each other with wooden sticks to see who will win. So it's very much still a tradition that lives on. Now, if you've ever seen the American US TV show The Office, then you might have heard of Der Belsnickel because of a character called Dwight Schrute, who always talks about his German origins, and he dresses up as the Belsnickel for one Christmas, and he is fully dressed up in brown rags and a hat, and he has a switch, like sticks, to hit people with, and he basically terrorizes the office and tries to find out if people have been impish or admirable, and gives them a gift or a punishment depending on what he deems they've done. And this is absolutely accurate. So this comes from German tradition, but it's also been sort of revived in the Pennsylvania Dutch community in the US, and even German communities in Brazil. So it's very much still alive today. And just like Dwight did, Der Belsnickel is coming to find out whether people have been good or not, whether they warrant a reward or a punishment, primarily looking for children. And when I was digging into this a little bit more, it was quite interesting because some of the early accounts of trying to make sense of the folklore of the region and recording stories and things did mention that Der Belsnickel wasn't always just a man, and sometimes was presented as a woman as well. So I'll just read out a quote from a man called Jacob Brown, who in 1830 described the Belsnickel as being either a man or a woman, but with masculine force and action. He or she would be equipped with an ample sack about the shoulders filled with cakes, nuts and fruit, and a long hazel switch which was supposed to have some kind of charm in it as well as a sting. One hand would scatter the goodies upon the floor, and then the scramble would begin by the delighted children, and the other hand would ply the switch upon the backs of the excited youngsters. So there you have it, that is Der Belsnickel. So we're going to move away from that area for a moment and head over to Iceland, where, as you can imagine, in a place where for a lot of the winter time you barely get much sunlight, there's a lot of winter stories in folklore that has arisen around this area. So we'll start with Gryla, who is a giant ogress. And Gryla has very ancient origins. So she's first mentioned in the Prose Edda, which was written down in the 13th century. But then it wasn't until the 17th century that it was written down about her winter associations and her gender as well. So her gender was not mentioned until the 17th century. From that point on, she was sort of embedded in the culture as a female. Though there is one poem that describes her as a hermaphrodite, which is very interesting. There is absolutely nothing pleasant to say about Gryla. She is not coming to give children gifts. No way. She doesn't care. She is coming down in the winter times. She's coming down from her mountain lair to look for children. She has an insatiable appetite for children, and she will stuff them into her sack, take them back to her cave and boil them up in a big stew and eat them. So Gryla is definitely not somebody that you want to come across, especially if you're a child. But Gryla doesn't operate alone, according to Icelandic folklore. She has a few friends to help her. So in the 17th century texts, we do have record of Gryla's sons, referred to as the Ulads, and she has 13 Ulads, and they all have slightly different characteristics of things that they do, the mischief and mayhem that they cause around the winter time. So they were said to visit homes and either leave gifts or rotten potatoes in children's shoes, depending on how they'd behaved. And over the years they've sort of softened, mellowed out a little bit in the folklore to become less frightening and become more like fun kind of Christmas time figures. And they all have different things that they get up to. So a lot of them are to do with stealing, but they steal very specific things, each one of them. So they might come in and steal food, clothing, they might lick your food, and then there's one that just likes to bang doors open and shut. So a lot of different things, but a lot of annoying things. So I think if you were terrorized by all 13 Yule lads at once, it would be very frustrating. Gryla is also said to have a cat called the Ucat or jólakudurinn. My Icelandic pronunciation is terrible. I did do a German degree, so I feel okay with that, but not Icelandic. So the Yule cat is first mentioned in the 1800s, and again, very hard to pinpoint the origins of this creature and where it comes from. Certainly not as ancient as Gryla, and more similar to things that have been sort of added on later, like the Yule lads. It is said that the Yule cat prowls Iceland on Christmas Eve and is looking for people who haven't received any clothes. And this might sound very strange, but again, it is another incentive for people to finish their work before the end of the year, because a very common gift would be for people to receive clothes after they had finished all their work. For example, a lot of farm workers would receive new clothes as a gift after they'd finished processing all the wool from the work that they had to do. So those who did the work would not be prey for the Yule cat, but if you left everything to the last minute and you hadn't gotten finished, then the Yule cat just might be coming for you. And similar to the Yule lads, this story mellowed out over the years as well. So some tales, they say that the Yule cat just comes and eats your food, doesn't eat you, whereas originally you would be food for the Yule cat. So again, this theme of getting your work done before the end of the year, like get it done, and don't be lazy, don't leave it. So I really feel for people who had just too much work that they couldn't get done, or you know, an actual valid reason for not finishing, because they might have been fearful of these creatures coming for them. So now we're heading over to Wales to talk about the Mari Lwyd, and you might have seen this creature before. It's very recognisable and very memorable, and it's essentially a wassailing folk custom which involved having a skeletal hobby horse that was under a sheet and decorated with ribbons. Now, I did talk about wassailing a little bit in my previous video on folk traditions. I'll put a link up there somewhere so you can check it out if you haven't already. But there's a lot of different wassailing traditions. Some of them involve pouring cider and singing in orchards to wake up the trees. But some wassailing involves singing, making jokes, wit, going from door to door, and this kind of thing as well. And this is where the Mari Lwyd falls into. So there's first written record of this in the 1800s, with loads more accounts from then up to the 20th century. But as with all things, it's probably a lot older than that, and it just wasn't written down beforehand. So according to these accounts, there would be a group of men that would go door to door, and there would often be a group of about 4 to 7 of them, and one would be a leader. He would be, you know, finely dressed and look like the leader. He might carry a whip or a stick. Then there might be a merry man who played music, and then a Punch and Judy sort of characters, which if you don't know what Punch and Judy is, how do I even describe it? It's like a puppet show. Yeah, it's definitely wouldn't pass the vibe check now, because it's essentially about Punch beating up his wife and other things like that, but it was very popular. So yeah, Punch and Judy. And then obviously the Mari Lwyd on the stick as well. And they would go from door to door, and they would knock on the door and have a bit of like back and forth with the owners. So they might sing, or they might have a bit of a battle of wits and like rhyming songs, however they want to do it. And they would expect to be denied entry a few times, like a bit of banter back and forth, and then eventually allowed into the home and given food and drink. So once inside, the Mari Lwyd might still be up to mischief, sort of terrorizing children a little bit, neighing, running around, clacking its jaws and all that kind of thing. And again, people aren't really sure exactly where the name comes from. Some people think that it actually comes from the Virgin Mary, but others think that it comes from grey mare. And there's some other thoughts as well about why is it actually called this, and where do the traditions lie. But it's very difficult with folk traditions like this, because of the nature of it just got passed down, it didn't get written down, so we just have to kind of make a best guess. The Mari Lwyd traditions did decline a little bit over the years, but then has definitely seen a big uptick in the 20th century. I think there is a folk revival in general going on in, I can't speak for the rest of the world, but definitely I've seen it in Britain. People want to reclaim these folk traditions, and I've seen a lot of people I know going to events or getting involved with the Mari Lwyd, so it's nice to see that people are practicing this custom again. Now we're going to head over to Italy for La Befana, who is a nice little break from all of these creatures. So we've had some really gruesome ones, and then we've had some sort of mischievous, playful ones. And La Befana is a really lovely Italian story, and she is essentially a kindly Christmas witch who will deliver gifts to children on Epiphany or Epiphany Eve. Again, her origins are debatable. She was mentioned in some medieval texts, and people were saying perhaps she comes from an older tradition of pre-Christian pagan goddesses. But then others again say that she is named after the pagan feast of Epiphany. So can't quite agree there. I feel like it's probably a bit of a mixture of the two, like with most things. So perhaps she came from a pre-Christian pagan tradition, then was sort of softened and Christianized to help her better fit the culture, and yeah, make people more amiable to Christianity, which is what happened with a lot of folklore. Because if you just tell people you can't do that anymore, that's wrong, all of that needs to go, they're not going to be very open to your religion. But if you weave them together, which is exactly what happened with paganism and Christianity, then people, you know, over the years, they start to blend together, and that's how you spread Christianity. So she is said to wear a headscarf, and she's got a basket or a sack to keep her gifts in. And very conveniently, she apparently doesn't like to be watched, so children are told to not go looking for her and not try to find her, because she won't like that at all. But once a year, she comes down from her mountain cave, she rides a broomstick through the air, and she will leave sweets and other little treats for the good children, and she might leave coal for the naughty. And she's said to be a very sweet, sort of helpful figure, and she might even use her broomstick to sweep your floor on the way out before she leaves. In Scandinavia, we have some really nice traditions about the household spirits, who are said to be even more active during the winter season. And there are household spirits all over the world. I literally bang on about them constantly, so I won't go into too much detail because I've got other videos like that folk traditions one if you want to learn more about that. But I mentioned Scandinavia specifically because there are winter traditions associated with the household spirit. So we have things like the nisse or tomte, who are small gnome-like creatures who will look after the household, guard the farms, and just generally sort of protect the property, especially over the winter. And they are generally benevolent, nice creatures, but they can be mischievous if they are disrespected. So if they're not thanked properly for what they do or ignored, then they might get a little bit mischievous. So one of the stories goes in Scandinavia that the farmers must remember to leave a bowl of porridge out for the nisse on Christmas Eve, because if you don't, it's very disrespectful to all the work that he's been doing through the year, and he might get up to some mischief or even cause harm to the livestock. So again, it's about this theme of gratitude and respect for spirits and abundance at this time of year. Okay, last one, otherwise we're going to be here all day, and there are so many other creatures that I haven't been able to mention. This is just some of the main ones that I sort of picked out, but I'm sure there are a lot more as well, all over the world, not just Europe, so please don't come for me for only picking out a few. The last one I wanted to mention is Deadmos, or Grandfather Frost. And this is a creature from Russian folklore who is said to be like a winter magician that delivers gifts. Deadmos is said to wear a full-length fur coat in either red or blue. He's often depicted in blue. He's got a fur hat, a long white beard, very like classic wizard sort of look, and he has a magical stick and he rides around on a little sled. And later on in the tradition, things are added in, like all the stories. He is also said to be accompanied by Snegurochka, who is the snow maiden and is said to be his granddaughter, though this addition wasn't put in until the 19th century. As with all the other creatures, the common theme is he is thought to predate Christianity and come from an earlier Slavic spirit of winter. But with things like Russian fairy tales, the influence of Santa Claus from Western culture, he became what we know him as today. So at the beginning of the Soviet era, Deadmos was actually banned. The communist authorities did not want Deadmos involved in anything, and they tried to wipe him out. However, this didn't work. The spirit of Deadmos endured, and then he became accepted and really part of the New Year's tradition as well. It's quite interesting if you start going down these rabbit holes, which I really hope you do, because I can't possibly fit everything into these YouTube videos. So definitely use these as like a little bit of a springboard to go and do some more research. So I was reading about the different regional differences in this character, and it's different depending on where you live and even countries as well. So in Slovenia, they have a Grandpa Frost figure, but he's depicted to be very different. He's said to be very slim, and he wears a grey leather coat and a furry hat made out of dormice. And there's little variations in the way that these figures behave and the things that they do depending on the location. So I definitely encourage you to go and read up. He's still very popular in modern Russia, and it's kind of like their version of Santa Claus. So he can be often found at, you know, children's parties, things like that, people dressed up and giving out gifts to the children. So I'm going to leave it there, and hopefully that has given you a nice little overview on some of the strange and unusual creatures from winter time in European folklore. And you can kind of see similar themes in all of them, no matter where they're from. So there's a big theme of hard work, getting work done before the close of the year. A lot of things about basically trying to get children to behave or not. And then themes of abundance and gratitude as well, and being grateful at this time of year. So if there's any from where you are that I've missed out, I'm sure there are plenty, please drop a comment and let me know, because I'd be interested in learning about them as well. And like I said, I would encourage you to just use this to give you some inspiration to go away and explore in whatever way you'd like to and learn a bit more about these creatures. This is going to be my last video before Christmas now, so I wish you the most lovely Christmas time, lovely Yule. I hope you have a fantastic New Year, though I think I will see you before then. And thank you so much for the support on the channel this year. It's been so nice, because sometimes with social media it can feel like you're just shouting into the void, and that's a little bit embarrassing. But then you know, recognizing that every view is a real person and interacting with you in the comments. And I've had people, literally earlier this week, someone came up to me when I was out and said they watched the channel, and it just means so much to be like, oh yes, you are real people and we have a real community and a real connection. And the reason I'm doing these videos is because I want to encourage people to be in connection with nature and be open to reviving folk traditions and keeping them going no matter where in the world they're from. So I hope that this channel has given you a little bit of peace and inspiration this year, because that's why I'm doing it. So thank you so much and have a great Christmas, and I will see you in the next video.